Yeah.
Hi, backstage. Are we ready to rock and roll?
Yes, we are.
Right. Good morning, everyone. I am County Councillor Mike Introna, the chair of that's £10 to the chairman's charity fund, I believe. So I'm chair of the committee for Children and Families Select Committee. I'd like to welcome you all to the meeting and just let you know that this meeting is being broadcast live and recorded for publication. So, item number 1, minutes of the last meeting. I've got a point on the minutes? Does anyone else have any comment on the minutes? No. In that case, then, may I please draw your attention to page 10 of the booklet, and the first bullet point, where we were lucky enough to have Dame Christine Lenihan come to our committee last time around. It says that it's noted that the current EHCP process was designed to support around 3% of school-aged children, not the current 18.9% of children in Nottinghamshire who had an EHCP. That's actually not correct. I believe what Dame Lenihan actually said was that in some parts of the UK, it is as high as 18.9%. Just for accuracy, my understanding is that the average in the UK is 4.8%. The average in Nottinghamshire of people aged between 0 and 25 is 2.54%. And the average in Nottinghamshire of school-aged children is 3.3%. So hopefully we can amend the minutes to suit. Okay, so can we have a show of hands on approval of the minutes, please? Thank you very much. I'd now like to ask the committee clerk if there are any apologies for absence.
Okay, we've received apologies from Councillor Francis Purdue-Horan for other reasons. We've also received apologies from Councillor Debbie Darby for illness, and we've received apologies from Councillor Michelle Welsh for other reasons, and we have Councillor Pauline Allen substituting for Councillor Welsh. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much and welcome, Pauline. Lovely to have you here today. So, declarations of interest, item number 3. Excuse me.
Is Councillor Gordon coming?
Okay, declarations of interest. If any councillor or officer has an interest in any matter on the agenda, you should declare it now. Please raise your hand now if you have an interest to declare. If you have an interest to declare, you should state what type of interest it is and give brief details. Anyone? Okay, thank you very much. So, agenda item number 4, Nottinghamshire approach to tackling child exploitation. I'd like to invite Colin Pettigrew, Corporate Director for Children and Families, to introduce the report. And after that, I'd like to ask Detective Inspector Dan Evans, welcome this morning, if there is anything he would like to add. Colin.
Thank you, Chair. And if I could also welcome our partners, particularly Police and Health, not only for this agenda item, but also for, well, probably all agenda items that cover the theme today, which is about partnership working, particularly agenda item 4 and 7. Agenda item 4 covers both the exploitation of children when they may be being sexually exploited or indeed criminally exploited. And we see sometimes it's the same children that are experiencing both of those things. And this reflects a move in policy position from central government about decriminalising children, because many children find themselves involved in crime. Yeah, about being involved with older, either young people or adults, and exploited into becoming involved in criminal activity. Yeah, and I'm sure that Dan and Ty will cover that when they get to it. It also reflects the need to understand, yeah, and to see children being exploited, sexually exploited, rather than language that we've seen in the past, yeah, for in places in Rotherham, etc., yeah, where children were perceived wrongly, yeah, to be participating in sexual activity rather than being exploited by adults to be exploited. And Rotherham also, following the Rotherham scandal and the Rotherham report, required local authorities to ensure that councillors in particular were aware of what the activity was happening in their local area. Professor J, yeah, who was the reviewer at Rotherham, was shocked, and indeed didn't feel that local councillors in Rotherham could say we didn't know, yeah, as a reason for not being aware of what was happening in Rotherham over many years for hundreds, if not thousands, of children. And therefore, Nottinghamshire County Council and successive administrations have asked for a report to be brought to either this committee or previously Children and Young People's Committee that outlined the activity, yeah, that we were undertaking across the partnership, the safeguarding partnership, to address sexual as well as criminal exploitation of children and young people. So that's the background to this report. I'll just finish by saying the Secretary of State at the time of the commission of the Rotherham report was Secretary of State Theresa May, yeah, and Secretary of State May stated really clearly and very publicly that those local areas that believe they don't have children being exploited in that area are the ones that she was worried about, not the ones that had activity, yeah, and a policy and a strategy to deal with it, yeah, because children are at risk of being exploited, yeah, criminally and sexually wherever they live in the country, particularly with regards to things like exploitation on the web that knows no boundaries. I'll pause there and introduce a couple of colleagues, one from the police and one from Nottinghamshire County Council, who's going to run through the Child Exploitation Annual Report. You'll see that there is a introduction, yeah, in the report itself from the chair of Nottinghamshire Safeguarding Children's Partnership, yeah, which is Assistant Chief Constable Rob Griffin. I'll pause there.
Okay, thank you.
Morning everyone, I'm Ty Yousaf, Strategic Head of Service for Safeguarding and Independent Review. I've got a very short presentation which I'm going to present with Dan, who's at the front, from the police about our approach to child exploitation and our annual report. So what is child exploitation? So child exploitation is manipulation, coercion or abuse of children for various purposes including labour, sexual activities and criminal activities. It's quite often seen as a hidden harm. Typically it occurs outside of the family home by individuals or organised criminal groups. Gaining the trust and having a position of power over children to perpetrate abuse. And the types of abuse is around sexual exploitation, labour exploitation, forcing a child to work or harm or illegal conditions, criminal exploitation, coercing a child into committing crimes. Some of the risk factors, if we can go to the next slide. I'm not sure who's controlling the screen. Oh, here we go. So some of the risk factors, well, all children that use social media are at potential risk, but there are particular vulnerabilities. Children from unstable or abusive homes are at more risk. Those that are socially isolated, a lack of support networks can increase their vulnerabilities. It can result in a child missing school, education, training, being more isolated from family and friends and missing out on education and training. So there's some of the risk factors. And then if we move on to signs and indicators, and some of those are, you would see behaviour changes. Sometimes children end up having sort of materially more aspects of goods that they would normally perhaps be perceived to have had, or have money that you wouldn't expect them to have had, can be blamed sometimes for their behaviours and risky actions rather than being seen as exploited and in need of safeguarding. And that's really important, as Colin has said, that they need to be seen as children rather than criminalised. And then moving on to our strategic partnership and governance arrangements, which Dan's going to talk to.
Might work a little better. Apologies. I'm Dan Evans. So I'm the Detective Inspector for the Child at Risk of Exploitation teams in Notts Police. So in terms of strategic partnerships and governance, it's important that we need to drive towards effective working in partnership at a strategic level down to your frontline delivery of services. In terms of that strategic level, we operate a tackling child exploitation steering group. We look at all types of exploitation, and that is a meeting of senior managers across the breadth of all key partners involved in this work, and that helps to inform and drive our work in our efforts to respond effectively to child exploitation. Missing episodes, as Ty's just alluded to, are key. It can be a key indicator of exploitation risk, and missing episodes themselves escalate the risks to children. So it's important that we have a multi-agency strategic approach to that, and that's met by our county missing children steering group. There are cross-cutting themes between missing and child exploitation. It's important we recognise that at a strategic level. Both those groups meet quarterly, and as I say, that is where we drive that strategic partnership work. Coming to achievements and impacts, so we've developed that partnership commitment to child exploitation, so that's an agreed commitment across all agencies. And I think it's important to say that, as the DI for the care team, I actually see that commitment not just from a strategic level, but to an operational level. We certainly, as a partnership with this specific local authority, working really closely on the ground. We're co-located, so at least on a weekly basis, as police, we're working closely with the local authority leads in this area of work, and I'm seeing that demonstrated on the ground and not just at a strategic level. We've launched a TC practice network for operational staff. That's not something I'm able to talk to in any detail. I'm not sure whether you can help with that, Ty.
Yeah, so the practice network is about practitioners meeting together to share best practice, what's working well, and resource and information. And that's what that network is for.
Okay, thank you. We've also a commissioned support service for children at risk of exploitation in terms of the Children's Society. They're heavily involved with our work. They will attend the strategic meetings that we've just alluded to. But again, we see that operationally on the ground, we're working really closely. So where I say we're working close with the local authority as part of the care team, we're co-located at times with the Children's Society as well. So, the reality is we are actually working with that support service to deliver a service for children that are suffering harm. We also have police-led neighbourhood and safeguarding and disruption meetings. They're held monthly in each district. This is in addition to the CSEP meetings that focus exclusively on criminal exploitation, and also the MACE meetings, as we call them, that focus on sexual exploitation. So I think we have to recognise, as a whole multi-agency, that child exploitation is everybody's responsibility. And it actually, it's something that we need to deal with at all levels of the organisation, whether you're a specialist or not. And certainly those NSD meetings, as they call them, we look at knife crime, violence, antisocial behaviour, all of which may be indicators of exploitation. So it's having that kind of all-encompassing approach and recognising it's everybody's responsibility and having the processes and framework in place to address that. And then finally, the commitments for 2024 and 2025. There's a launch of a revised multi-agency child exploitation risk assessment, which we expect to be a lot more effective at identifying child exploitation, but also making an accurate assessment of what that risk is. We're preparing a public awareness campaign and delivering a Tackling Child Exploitation conference in March, and the aim of that being to improve the knowledge and skills that are available to practitioners that are delivering this service to children and families. We are also looking at a joint partnership training event, again, to fill those gaps and make sure we're as effective as we can be to respond to this threat. And then finally, we're using the 4P framework: prepare, prevent, protect, and pursue perpetrators. In effect, no more can, and I perhaps speak from a police perspective, no more is it enough that we prosecute offenders. We need to be preventing further offences and further harm to children, and that's certainly something that, via that 4Ps framework, we're recognising not just as a single agency, but as an interagency as well. And then finally, it's not on the slide, but I will just mention we have just completed a joint partnership audit. So that's looking at how effective we are now as a partnership in tackling child exploitation. That's just awaiting sign-off from senior managers, and we'll be looking at to deliver on the recommendations that have fallen out of that audit.
Okay, thank you, Detective Inspector, and thank you, Ty. And thank you to all of you that's provided the information that we've got from the Nottinghamshire Safeguarding Children Partnership, and certainly the strategy document, which is very thorough and comprehensive. I'd like to invite Councillor Tracy Taylor if you've anything you'd like to add further.
Thank you. I don't think I particularly do. I think it's probably more helpful for us to go into members' questions. As has already been stated, what we're receiving here is a report of the partnership, slight lag on it because obviously they've gone through their annual processes before it gets here. And as Colin described when he spoke, this makes sure that we as councillors should never be in a position to say we did not know what was going on where we are. Again, as has been said by a couple of people, some of our young people will always be at risk. So this is the work that we've been doing as a partnership to ensure that they are at least as least at risk as we can possibly make them, and that we remain vigilant, trying to support them through a whole raft of measures, not least the ones which have just been described on the slide deck.
Thank you. Just a second. I'd like to move the recommendations as shown on page 19 of the report, and I'd like to seek a seconder, please. Councillor Callum, thank you very much. I'm now going to open the floor to debate. Jono, did you want to go first, please?
A really quick question, Chairman. We have seen incidents happen in Newark of this. There was a young girl who was assaulted. However, what frustrates my residents is they seem to report lots of things that they see, from antisocial behaviour to children maybe being put in a vulnerable situation with drugs or alcohol, but they never see an outcome to their complaints or to their acknowledgement. Now, we know that if everybody in the community was to log everything with millions of pairs of eyes, it would make our lives easier, right? But the problem for my residents is they report something and don't see that outcome of what their complaint did or what their concerns raised, so they stop raising concerns. So my question is how can we, as an organisation and yourself, work to make more people report it, but also let them know what they're doing is the right thing and it is helping us? They might not see an immediate outcome, but down the line it will help us. Because if we don't get the residents supporting us, then we're already failing.
Who wants to take that? Tracy?
I may also defer to others for professional opinions, but I think my starting point, Councillor Lee, would be the difference between reporting ASB and the risks of criminal exploitation or sexual exploitation of children. Now, one may be around another, but they're not the same thing. You know, children who are acting out, let's say, or some acts of ASB are not necessarily connected in any way to the exploitation of children. They may be, they may not. But I think for us as counsellors, we have quite a job to do in managing the expectations of our residents. And I would say that sometimes they're not going to see the feedback. There may be an active criminal case, there may be some other investigations going on. So I think it starts with us in terms of encouraging reporting of what we think is not right, although the incidents you've described, I would suggest, are not the same as the exploitation. And then the other is to explain to them why sometimes they will not be in receipt of feedback, because the processes, particularly legal processes, simply don't allow that. But encouraging them to believe and understand that that does not mean that work is not ongoing, simply that they are not necessarily entitled to be the holders of that information.
Jono? Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Callahan.
I've got two questions, if that's okay. On paragraph, page 18, paragraph 7, it says for the year 2023-24, there has been a reduction in both the overall number of missing incidents and the numbers of child exploitation cases has declined, demonstrating the effectiveness of the measures implemented. Can we confidently say this is down to the measures that have been taken across Nottinghamshire, or is this in line with the wider trend of reduction in cases of child exploitation? If it's the latter, why do you think this is? That's the first question. Do you want to answer that, or do you want me to say the second question?
Can we take the first question first, please? Who's going with that?
Apologies. I think it's a real difficult one. I mean, looking at it is a fact that, as the report says, that there are less children identified as being at risk of exploitation and less missing episodes. So I think we do have to celebrate that there is likely to be some success in that. I do think it's something that we have to be very careful with, because we do have to also ask, are we effectively identifying children at risk of exploitation? And I think the way we do that is by working in partnership to make sure we've shared all the information we can to make that informed assessment of that as a multi-agency. And as I say, it's something we need to keep a close eye on. Certainly in police, and we use threat assessments, and that is across all the information that's available to us, depending on the good information sharing we have with partner agencies. So whilst I think it is a success in terms of those lower numbers, we do have to make sure that we're identifying exploitation as best we can, and that we're identifying exploitation across all communities as well. I think that's something that we do need to be sure of.
Okay, thank you. And your second question. Colin, I do apologise.
I'll respond very quickly. Oops. Is that me? Yeah, so I'm turning into the Jimi Hendrix of the Select Committee. Ofsted spoke directly about this point, Councillor Callahan, in their ILAC's report. Social workers are confident in identifying and responding to any risks associated with exploitation, and they carry out high quality risk assessments which are regularly updated. They're skilled in supporting children who've experienced exploitation and children whose behaviour is harmful to themselves and others. This is helping to reduce risks for some children, and that speaks to those children that are at risk of repeatedly being exploited. Yeah, because they're going missing repeatedly, they're on the street repeatedly. Yeah, so Ofsted recognised that we were actually very effective in intervening and stopping that.
Thank you, Colin.
My second question is on page 21, and it's paragraph 1, talks about the child exploitation and children who go missing from home and care in a joined up way. My question is it the same pool of children who are affected by these two situations? If not, what's the rationale for approaching them as a connected problem or issue?
Thank you. Councillor Callaghan. Who wants to take that? Colin.
I'll introduce either Dan or Ty on this, but I think Dan in his presentation made reference to missing from home as a risk factor, to becoming involved in either criminal exploitation when you're out and about, or indeed sexual exploitation or exploitation of a different type. So I think the short answer is yes, they are. Yeah, it's a Venn diagram.
I will learn where that button is eventually. Apologies. There is a connection between missing from home and the risk associated with that and child exploitation. I mean, my focus, if one sort of priority, is towards the children at the highest risk of exploitation, and looking at those children specifically. There is definitely a correlation in terms of being missing from home and the risks that present, both in terms of the escalation of that risk, but also recognising that we need to notice that as an indicator that a child may be being exploited. There are mechanisms in place to really protect against that, but also for all agencies to be professionally curious. So return from home interviews are, it is the bread and butter really of how we look to identify what the risks are, and look for opportunities to reduce that risk and pursue perpetrators. So there are definite links, and it does feature in the report because there is a real correlation.
And just to add that the vast majority of children that go missing is due to sort of family relationships and conflict. It doesn't mean to say they are all going to be exploited. And if a child goes missing 3 times, then we have a multi-agency meeting just to make sure we're not missing any issues, there's no gaps in service provision. The more they go missing, the more chances they are at greater risk of being harmed.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Turner.
Yeah, thank you. Very difficult subject, and one of the words that's been used quite a lot already is prevention. The prevention measures, does that take you into schools? Do you work with schools on that? Because it's a very difficult subject, very touchy subject.
We have,
and if so, how do you do it?
So we have colleagues who work with schools and go into schools, and that is a piece of work that we're continuing to do as well as.
If I can just add there, Chair, we have had, as a council, we've had a team within the Education Support Services called Tackling Emerging Threats to Children, and they've been working with schools over a period of years. So that's an embedded part of our support to schools and to children. They have recently been renamed, and I can't for the life of me think what, because it's an even more convoluted name, I think now. But as a work stream, it's there.
Yeah, hi. Peter McConaughey, Director of Education. So yes, we've got what was previously known as the TEC team, the Tackling Emerging Threats to Children team, is now the Education, Safeguarding and Wellbeing Hub. And that team work with our schools to promote safety for all young people, particularly from emerging threats and new technologies. There's also Harm Outside the Home Toolkit, which is trained and is available for all schools. And there's also links to our designated safeguarding lead forums and networks as well, where that partnership message, responses and support are delivered to all safeguarding leads across schools. And there's a conference, previously been a conference involving schools around this particular issue to further strengthen their abilities to safeguard, identify and work with other agencies around these issues.
Okay, thank you all. Councillor Turner. Dan.
Just going to add to that, apologies. Speaking on behalf of the police, so we have 2 early intervention PCs that work really closely with the local authority. So the exploitation lead for Nottingham County Council, we work really closely with them in terms of early intervention visits to children and that work. I think it's also worth mentioning that we operate something called Operation Striver, which education and schools are part of that, and it's an opportunity for all frontline professionals to share intelligence with the police. So it then features as part of that multi-agency working, again, to, at an early stage, build that intelligence picture and look to not only disrupt when exploitation is happening, but to prevent it. And early intervention is key, and I think that's something we do recognise as a multi-agency.
Thank you all. I've got James next, and then Nigel. I've got you second. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Really encouraged by the report. Thank you very much to everyone who works hard on all the activities described there. A couple of questions, and if I may, the first one, I was really pleased to see the increased partnership work across the local authority boundaries, the city and the county. I run a trust with lots of schools, and many of them are around that area. We are aware that although there is a boundary for criminal activity, that doesn't exist. So thank you for that. The question really is there going to be a development of those links outside of just the Nottingham City and Nottinghamshire? As we're aware that county lines, for example, there's a lot of traffic goes out over towards the coastal areas in Lincolnshire. So are there plans to develop that partnership as well, would be my first question.
So again, speaking on behalf of the police, whilst I operate a team focusing on child exploitation, we do also have a county lines team in addition to that, and that's where we perhaps see that kind of cross-boundary perpetration of exploitation. So it's something that we recognise, and we have an operational, we have the means to deliver against that operationally. And again, that county lines team, working in conjunction with us, are able to feed into and benefit from that partnership working. So the exploitation leads that are in our office and so forth. So it is something we recognise. I mean, we're fortunate as a police service to benefit from a shared crime and intelligence system across the whole region. So, you know, in terms of our information sharing, we're able to feed that into the partnership. Should it be within the East Midlands? Now, that's not to say that if it's outside of the East Midlands that would then struggle. We certainly wouldn't. But again, I think we're able as a police service to assist the partnership with information that we're able to share, whatever boundary exploitation might cross.
Okay, James.
Thank you. I just wanted to add, if possible, I'm Rachel Miller, Director for Commissioning. The Harms Outside the Home toolkit, which Peter referenced, which is a toolkit for use in schools, was in fact developed regionally. We took a lead on it, but it was an East Midlands regional piece of work, which means that the same advice and guidance is being used right across the 10 East Midlands authorities. And we have really good partnership working where we're bordering in particular, for exactly the same reasons that you mentioned. The other thing to say there is operationally, we have good connections with the local authorities where we know perhaps that there are typically import and export. We've got young people coming and living in Nottinghamshire or being exploited in Nottinghamshire or vice versa. And we will work really closely with both the social care colleagues in those areas, and they will attend meetings. It's one of the benefits of teams is that we do get attendance at our meetings, and likewise our social workers will attend if necessary in other areas. And that practice also happens across police as well, and we'll see police officers from Lincolnshire, for example, representing the coastline that would, if necessary, come along to one of our exploitation meetings. So there is some really good practice and we're continuing to drive that practice forward. The one other one to mention, is British Transport Police. They're a really important partner because we know a lot of the children will travel on public transport, and there's a really key role for the British Transport Police as a national organisation to identify and work with local authorities. But you can imagine it's really challenging for them because they've got all those local authorities and all those police forces, all with slightly different approaches. And we have done some work with them on our Tackling Child Exploitation programme, TCE. The British Transport Police have been involved in that as well. So some really good examples of partnership working nationally as well.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you. Yeah, really strong partnership work. Thank you. The other point I was going to make builds on the question earlier, or the point raised earlier about the work with schools. Is there anything that we could do to strengthen that further? I know that you've been involved in the training in the different areas of the local authority. Children in schools, the earliest point we'll pick up on potential risks is likely to be with teachers or support staff in schools noticing some of these indicators. Do we think we need to strengthen them? I guess we do need to strengthen that even further. And what would be the way that we can do that? I think is quite an important question.
I did mention earlier that we are looking at a joint partnership training event specifically focusing on child exploitation, and I would hope that as part of that we'll be including education professionals as well, and giving them an opportunity to develop their own skills and knowledge. I think it's fair to recognise it is everyone's responsibility, so we do have to equip all frontline professionals, including education, to recognise the warning signs and report that. Again, I'm aware of multiple examples of specific training events and outreach to children in education establishments to help children recognise the risks and the warning signs for exploitation, which is important as well. And as part of the slides, we did mention that we're working on an awareness campaign, and I think that will play a big part in it, raising awareness for everyone, and that includes young people.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Colin, and then I've got Peter, and then Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. One of the things the partnership invests a significant amount of money and time in is our multi-agency training. One of the things that we recognise, James, is that if children and young people are going to share intimate information about feeling at risk, they're likely to do that with an adult that they trust. Yeah, and those are often teachers, teaching assistants, or other staff that work in schools. Yeah, so our approach is about training the staff in the schools, and other settings, to be aware of the risks and what indications might suggest risks to that. And our trainers across the police and children's social care do a fantastic job every year, training hundreds and hundreds of colleagues from across the partnership.
Yeah, thank you, James. And just to acknowledge the role that all staff within education settings play, teachers, senior leaders, midday supervisors, and everybody within that school environment. I think that's why it's critically important that we've got strong designated safeguarding leads that access that training that's available through the pathways that have been discussed, but also take that on board within their own school settings and ensure that all staff have got that awareness so that they can pick up on any signs and warnings as early as possible. So that in-school training is key. And just the other thing I wanted to mention was the early intervention officers in schools that Nottinghamshire Police have in place across Nottinghamshire and Nottingham City to support with training of staff, with awareness raising and working with schools operationally.
Thank you, Peter. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. It was just to add another a comment on another aspect, I think, of the relationship with schools, and it's the important part that schools play in an approach to inclusion. And we saw on the slide deck how children who are outside education, whether that's because they're truanting actively or because they have been excluded, are more vulnerable to exploitation. Time on their hands makes them vulnerable. So as much as there is a role for the partnership and the local authority in training schools, we absolutely rely on our education partners having that strong approach to inclusion. And it could be that children are, again, I'll use the expression, acting out, and that schools can find that difficult to deal with, and there may be times for temporary or more permanent exclusion, but that means collectively as partnerships that we need to be working to support those children in order that they can remain included and not sitting outside where they are more vulnerable.
James? Yeah? Okay, can I ask you? Yes. Nigel?
Thank you. Can I begin by saying how encouraged I am to see this strategy being rolled out, without a doubt, because of the work that's being explored and developed. Countless numbers of children will be safer, and my hope is that some of the difficulties they could land themselves in will be prevented. And the emphasis on prevent is just hugely encouraging. My question is whether, following on from James's question about the training and the awareness being raised in partnership with schools, will there be an approach whereby, let's say, a particular child is identified as being vulnerable? Will there be a kind of multi-agency case study where the professionals, including safeguarding leads from schools, get into a room together to focus on that child, to pool everything they know about the child's relationships, their connections, their circumstances, so that there is a real joining of the dots and a working out of where the red flags probably are? Because I think that's where some of the most effective work could be done in all of this, but it's also incredibly resource heavy and time consuming. It could, though, save lives. So my question is there a place for that within the strategy that's being developed?
Okay, thank you for that question, Nigel. Who wants to take that?
The brief answer, if I may, and then perhaps Dan will come in, or Amanda, is that's right, and that's why it already exists within our child protection and safeguarding process and procedure. I said hundreds and hundreds. 572 colleagues from across partnership attended online training, and 323 have attended face-to-face training. So almost 1,000 colleagues trained in the last year.
Yeah, I was going to say just that is how we operate in terms of managing and trying to mitigate and stop that risk to children at risk of all types of exploitation. I think just further to that, it's also worth, in respect of individual children, reviewing how effective we've been in terms of individual cases, and that's something that we have done through the audit. So the audit that we completed focused on specific cases to actually review how effective we had been in terms of those cases, and that's something I hope will continue.
And if I may add, you'll be aware of the MASH, the Multi-Agency Safeguarding Hub, and you may be aware that we've been undertaking some work to adapt the model and the way that referrers interact with the MASH, so that we're moving from a thresholds-based model to a needs-based model. And a lot of the work, I'm trying to think who's here today, possibly Amanda, a lot of the work that they've been doing has been on an evolving model, test and implement, particularly in the Basset Law area. And the feedback that I've had from some of the sessions I've had there with the weekly or monthly show and tell sessions for that evolving work has been giving us examples of how, by having access to more colleagues across the partnership and identifying certain triggers, the work that's been going through the MASH has been allowing them to have those multi-agency meetings, and they've given a few anonymised but good news stories about child X and child Y that show us that something that perhaps would have been less visible before if we worked in a more compartmentalised way has actually been there's been sunlight shone on it by virtue of having all of the right people in the room. So that's part of an active work stream, and that's what we expect to roll out with the evolution of the MASH. Please tell me I remember that right, Amanda.
Yes, you absolutely have, Councillor Taylor. I think the other important meetings that Dan referenced earlier were the neighbourhood safeguarding disruption meetings. I think they're really important in terms of who's involved in those meetings. We have staff from the district councils who are out there on the streets. They're knowing the children who are actually out there maybe, and that they bring the children to those meetings, so we can have a around the table discussion really in terms of what's happening. So really understanding the neighbourhoods, understanding the children, and thinking about what might be happening for them, and putting the right sort of prevention measures in place to mitigate some of those concerns.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Nigel?
One last question, if I may, but first of all, excellent. I mean, thank you. And so encouraging. I can't overemphasize how important this work is. My final question then is, a number of us will be aware, I'm sure, of the theory and the understanding of adverse childhood experiences and the impact of those on young people. and hence the kind of mapping exercise I was asking about a moment ago, the joining of the dots, including the previous history of the child. What have they been through, and how likely is that has a bearing on their current behaviour? I'm guessing you're going to say yes, absolutely, but I'm just asking the question, is that part of the strategy? Yes, I thought that might be your answer. Thank you very much.
Rachel, do you want to?
Yes, just to offer some encouragement, specifically when a child is identified at sort of low, medium, or high risk of being exploited, which sometimes means that they are being exploited, and we are. So it's not preventative, it's intervention. They will have an assessment by a qualified social worker or a youth justice case manager, which absolutely will seek to understand the family history, what has happened, what's going on at the moment, what are the family influences, the peer influences on that child, and then seek to put a plan together that both addresses those things, but then really importantly, and this is the stuff that's ever so slightly more new and has done reference, that pursuing of the exploiters. So not just wrapping a plan around the child, but wrapping a plan around the neighbourhood and around who we think is perpetrating the grooming activity, for example. Sorry, Ty, because I know you thought you might have come in then.
I was just going to say, as has been said, I think by Dan during the presentation, we've also commissioned a service from the Children's Society to work directly with children, young people and families in terms of their support needs. And we're always trying to seek views back in terms of what's working, what's most effective, what can we do better, what can we do more of, to get the views back from children and families directly impacted. So it's ongoing.
I think so. Just finally, as a strategic partnership, we are looking to ensure that all processes and assessments are trauma informed, and that we recognise how that impacts and worsens the harm to children. So there is that. We do need to take a trauma informed approach, and we also recognise how the use of language throughout by professionals when interacting with children is really important, and the use of language is certainly something that we're looking to, and I feed into training, and we're looking as a partnership to ensure that is consistent across all levels of the organisation, not just within the specialist areas that deal exclusively with child exploitation.
Okay, thank you all. Councillor Henry, we're going to take one last comment from you, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As a social worker, I am very encouraged on this report. This report, it does appear from what I'm hearing that there's good engagement across the board. There's good local partnership going on, and it's consistent across the county, which that's what I'm hearing from you, and it's very good to hear that. And I'll go with what you said, Nigel. It will save lives, I think, and I'm happy to hear that. Just one question. It's on page 24, paragraph 15, where you talked about the monthly child criminal exploitation panel, and also about the reviews. And as a Gedling councillor, I'm sure you know I was going to mention that, but it's the bit around that most of the reviews are mainly in Gedling and the Rushcliffe districts, notably because they are part of the Nottingham city boundary. So why Gedling and Rushcliffe? Is it primarily down to the fact that the proximity to the city, or are there other factors in those areas contributed to the greater incidence of child exploitation? I was going to ask another one, but I think D.I. Dan answered most of that, so I won't bother ask that one. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Henry. Who wants to take that?
So I won't comment in regards to Gedling and was it Rushcliffe, the other area that you mentioned, but it is something that as a partnership we're increasingly becoming switched on to. So within the care team, we've just recruited an analyst. So this is someone that will look at the threat across all local authorities and start to make that assessment as to if we do have an increased instances of exploitation in certain areas, why is that? In past work that I've done, sometimes you find that actually populations might be a lot more dense in certain areas. So but it is understanding why are those instances higher. So in terms of the work, we're now doing that work as part of our threat assessment, and that will be fed into the partnership. So once we understand that a little better, we'll look at a partnership approach to dealing with that.
So are you saying that there are other factors that you're not quite sure about yet that contributed into this?
There may be. It's a really being honest, it's a real complex area, and we rely on data to inform what our approach is going to be to tackle that. So as I say, it's something we're certainly aware of in terms of geography. It's something that we'll deal with as part of the concerns network that we operate, in terms of looking at specific properties or areas where there'll be heightened instances of exploitation related incidents. So it is certainly something we're aware of as a partnership, and we will tackle it from a geographical perspective where we can, and we have an evidence base to inform that approach.
Okay, so Martin, could you give us a summary of the discussion and anything that we need to raise?
I think it's been a really detailed discussion, so thank you everyone for that. And there's no further actions coming out of the meetings, but I'm sure you'd like to thank Dan for attending, and it's probably something that we'll look at to bring it to look at again as part of the work programming process, if that's something that members would like to do.
Okay, thank you. What I'd like to do is bring to the vote with a show of hands the recommendation on page 19. All those in favour? Okay, that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Yeah, an excellent report. Thank you for those that brought it to the work programme during our discussions recently. Thank you for the presentations, for everyone that's attended. Detective Inspector, I'm sure you've got a rather full day, a rather full week. So as much as you are most welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting, if you need to get off and do more of your day job, then that's fine. But thank you ever so much for attending. It's very, very warmly appreciated. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on because we've got quite a bit to get through still. And agenda item number 5, the early years and childcare sector in Nottinghamshire. So I am going to invite Councillor Tracy Taylor, Cabinet Member for Children and Families, to introduce the report, which starts on page 45. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. As it says in the opening paragraph, this is to bring you up to date with the childcare expansion programme, so sufficiency for childcare, particularly in the light of the expanded programme which was introduced by the previous government and which is being continued under this government. The report before us today talks about those things that we know were scheduled to happen, like expansion to particular age cohorts or working parents or otherwise. It does not yet deal specifically with some of the headlines we've had from the new government about, let's say, breakfast clubs. So we haven't quite got there yet, have we? We don't know quite what that means for us yet. So again, I would invite questions, Chair.
Excuse me. I'd like to ask it, are there any officers that would like to comment before we open it up to the floor? Irene.
Thank you. Yes, as Councillor Taylor said, this is very much about the new reforms, and this is why we wanted to have, you asked for another paper to come here after the paper we had in February last year. And I think it's important, I mean, I don't want to go through the paper, assume you've all read it, but there are certainly some challenges for us as a local authority in terms of implementing further expansion of the childcare. There's current challenges just before the expansion programme. So as an example, we know there are lots more children now with special educational needs accessing childcare. That requires additional funding. It requires our childcare providers to be really inclusive and have the skills to be able to support those children while they're in that early year setting, but also transition to school. We also know, and you will have heard in the media, financial viability for a lot of our early years settings is of concern. Great news that the minimum wage has gone up, but actually what we then need is additional funding from government to be able to pay for that, because it does impact. But again, even before that, overheads are going up. Hourly rates have remained fairly static, although we're predicting they will be increased again. And we, as a local authority, pass as much of our funding on to the early years sector as possible. Local authorities are entitled to retain between 3 and 5% of their funding, the overall funding they get, and we always issue about just over 1%. We retain just 1%, and that keeps the team, that pays for the team and the duties that we have to fulfil. The rest of it does go to the early years sector. We do try our best on that. The other key challenge that I can't leave this room without mentioning to you, we've always had a duty to provide childcare to 2-year-olds from low-income households and children looked after at the age of 2. They're entitled to 15 hours of funded early education and childcare a week. However, since the expansion, we're concerned that early years providers will prioritise 2-year-olds from working households and likewise prioritise babies from working households now that they're also entitled to that that funded childcare. When we wrote the report, we were doing quite well in terms of the take-up for those 2-year-olds. However, early indication, and this isn't in the report yet, early indication for this current term shows a slight dip. So we are going to monitor that, and that's something that we will be looking at, or have been looking at, in the joint health scrutiny and children's scrutiny review of school readiness. So apologies, those of you that are part of that review, you've heard me talk about this quite a lot. So I wanted just to raise those challenges. We are doing a lot as a local authority to try and improve the funding levels, the quality of early years provision, but also we now have new duties as well around wraparound childcare. So that's something we're working with schools on. We've got some good coverage in terms of wraparound childcare. Some of it's provided by the school itself, some of it's alternative charities, different private businesses. So the Breakfast Club rollout is going to build on what's already happened in terms of the wraparound childcare. But again, we're not clear on how that is going to be implemented yet. The other thing that's come out since we've written the report is a real focus on school-based nurseries, and that's something that we're keeping a close eye on because the majority of our schools already in Nottinghamshire have nursery provision, whether it's run by themselves or a private or voluntary sector childcare provider.
Okay, thank you, Irene. I'd like to move the recommendations on page 54 and seek a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Callaghan. And I am now going to open the floor for debate. So, first, Councillor Callaghan, thank you.
Thank you. I think you've partly answered some of my questions, Irene, but I'm going to ask them anyway. So on page 47, paragraph 12, bullet point 5, it's stating there's no areas of the county where demand for funded childcare outweighs supply. There are 8 wards where there are less than 10% vacancy rates, and 8 wards are reporting that over 40% of their places remain unfulfilled. So my question is, where are those 8 wards? What factors are resulting in such high vacancy rates in those areas? So that's that question. Do you want to answer that one, Irene? Or
Please, Irene.
Thank you very much. Yeah, there are eight wards. I should have come prepared with a list of all of those 8 wards, but I can give you the ones that I'm particularly concerned about, that I know about is... Yeah, no, you're okay. You're okay in Mansfield. You're absolutely okay. There's gaps at the moment in areas of Bassett Law, so the Langold area. We know there are gaps in Colton Netherfield area, but it means 10%. It's not that there is insufficient. There's just those are the areas we need to really keep an eye on at the moment, and a lot of that is because childminders resign. We always have a churn of childminders as more paperwork comes in. Some people are put off by the amount of paperwork required with Ofsted and Department for Education. But we have seen some closures in some nurseries. and that's where we do our best to try and find alternative providers or encourage schools to lower their age range. Have I answered that properly? I can send you the list of the 8 wards as well.
So my second question is on page 48, and it's paragraph 18, and it says there are a variety of different wraparound models being used in the county. And my question is this: is the variety working in knots? Would it be beneficial to have a more coordinated or standardised approach to wraparound childcare? And is there scope or desirability for this kind of change?
Thank you. It's an interesting one because I think the funding that we've always had as a local authority is focused on the early years. So it does say in the report there is a gap with capacity in terms of wraparound. There's no additional permanent funding for that. We've got some temporary posts at the moment who are providing guidance and are trying to confirm the models that people want. The issue that we have is each local area is slightly different. So in some areas you'll have more working parents who may want longer hours in the evening. In some areas they want the breakfast club and they don't want the after school. So there's always going to be some variation, but certainly Department for Education guidance has given some times for when they want provision to be available. So a lot of the guidance says keep it open till 5 o'clock. Some schools can't do that. So it really will vary. But capacity, if we had permanent capacity, if there was more focus on schools to engage in quality, for example, we have a group of teachers that advise early year settings. We don't have anything like that for wraparound provision. It would be good to have that, and we're certainly setting up networks of wraparound providers at the moment, sharing good practice and so on. But we're going to struggle trying to get a standardised approach.
Thank you, Irene. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. I think Irene's really covered off most of what I was thinking about, but I suppose I would just say I'm always very nervous about one size trying to fit all, and I think one of our strengths has been flexibility in a lot of our service areas, being nimble, delivering different ways for different communities. I mean, you've been involved in conversations about the family hub model, and we've said that these are not all the same. Every community has different needs, it has different partners within it. So totally agree with Irene. We benefit from having clear guidelines about what is expected, but I would always suggest that flexibility in the way that we deliver what's expected will best meet the needs of our schools and our communities.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Are there any other? James.
Thank you. Just picking up on a couple of things around finance. I know we've talked about this whenever SEND does come up, but there's a real opportunity at the early years point to get early assessments in. We don't feel in the school sector that the capacity is there, the funding's not there, and it sets some children off automatically on a delay to their development journey. So I know you can't solve that for a second, but it's something to raise again, I think.
Who's going to go with that? Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman, and thanks, James, for that question. What we have done is we have listened to earlier sectors and infant schools, standalone infant schools, who then children attend thereafter go to earlier settings without funding allocated to them, and we've tried to rejig how we do that. So that's a county council model, not a government model dictated to us. So we are, I don't know if we're trialling it or we've implemented it now. Peter will confirm, but where if children are receiving funding to meet SEND need in early year settings, once they then start at infant school, if it's a standalone infant school, that funding will continue, so that infant SENCOs aren't spending years trying to get that funding recommitted, and then by the time they get it, they're out the door into a junior school. Of course, that applies to primary settings as well, and then through the annual review process, we can look at those cases and change the funding if required, or the support they're required. But we have done that. I'm sure it's in place now. Peter will correct me if I'm wrong.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. James.
Yeah, just to come in, thank you. Just as a yes, obviously mainstream schools, we have increased the high needs funding availability by 70% over 5 years. A key part of the next development is the piloting currently of the bridging funding to bridge that gap between early year settings and mainstream school provision, to reduce bureaucracy and process, to make sure that where that assessment identification is made, that continuation of support is in place. I think the other thing to mention is just that the Early Years in Schools Forum, which is again is a partnership forum, plays an active role in looking at the use of high needs funding and the early years funding around inclusion, and are always looking for opportunities to maximise that and focus on that early intervention. And that's a live conversation at Schools Forum.
Thank you.
Thank you. Second point, again, there may not be much that we can do about this, but when we talk about wraparound care and schools not providing it themselves but getting in a third party, there is considerable variation in the amount that is charged to parents. It would, and obviously the school is within their remit to not engage a company they feel is overcharging, but sometimes there aren't that many who are tendering for the contract. It's what we could possibly do about encouraging there to be a maximum charge for those sessions.
It's a very good question, and it links to the standardisation issue as well. So as a local authority, we have very little power, but it does sit with the school very much. So where we are getting schools who are tendering, so they're inviting a provider to come and deliver after school provision or breakfast clubs, then that's where we can support the school to say, right, in that document you need to put in a maximum of what you think your families will be able to pay. So the power then potentially sits with the school, and our team can advise on that. The challenge we've got is a lot of schools are not going through a tender process. So we've got a lot of maybe not a lot, we've got a few providers who are knocking on doors of schools saying, we can do this for you. And there's no real clear accountability or guidance agreement made with that provider, and that's where we end up with potential problems. So whether it be there isn't a lease, a license for them to be in the building, or the issue with charging, or even quality. So we will support schools as much as possible, but again, it's down to the local area. Some areas, so if you are a school in Rushcliffe, for example, that provider may feel that the market can afford it. Again, it's up to them, I'm afraid.
Thanks, Irene. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, and I think you make a really valid point, James. I was going to say I'm a great believer, or I'm frequently nervous about the doctrine of unintended consequences, and I think it's often the case that where new burdens and obligations are placed on authorities to deliver, whether that's us as local authority, whether it's the schools, it sometimes creates a brand new marketplace to be exploited. So I would use the example that we know of children's social care, where we have a monopsony situation, so the reverse of a monopoly, where local authorities are the only buyer in the market, so the providers charge what they think that they will. And I can see this being a perfect opportunity for people to seek to move into the market, because local authorities and schools will be obliged to provide, irrespective of whether they can make it work under their own auspices, a school providing it themselves, and that there may well be providers coming into the space in order to exploit it financially. And as Irene has said, we have no powers over that. But this is where I think it's really important that we feed back our views whenever there's a consultation process, because I sometimes think that government of all hues don't think through to the minutiae and those unintended consequences, and it's incumbent on us to raise our voice early in order to not fall foul of them later on.
Yeah, for us it's about risk. If we set up that provision and we've got a guaranteed number of children in all the time, that's fine, we'll do that. But when it fluctuates and through the year or even across the years, that creates us that extra issue, and of course there's no funding guaranteed for this at all.
And I think we have a concern that parents think this is funded, that they can approach the school and either the school or government is paying for this place, and that's certainly a risk as well for a lot of parents who choose to use certain days and not. It's extremely hard to design a model that's going to be financially viable when you have so many children fluctuating in their attendance, really. The other thing, just to plug very quickly, is there are tax-free childcare vouchers for families, and they do go up to the end of primary school. So there is some financial support out there. We're not very good at promoting it. And I would say, for everybody involved, if families are coming to you, that is available, certainly from low-income households.
Thanks, Irene. Colin, did you want to?
If I may, Chair, and we saw what that looks like in the extreme with regards to early years and schools during COVID, where we had our schools open for essential key workers, children, and most vulnerable children, and schools were fully funded rightly. Hence that. No matter how many children they had over their thresholds, our early years nursery provision was only funded by the number of key worker children or vulnerable children that attended. And for many of those children, their parents were working from home or furloughed, and therefore were not sending their children. That was a really difficult period. And this local authority stepped in significantly with regards to additional grant funding, particularly for that first Easter period. I seem to remember. It seems like a long time ago, but
Okay, thank you, Colin. James, thanks. That was a very good question and a challenge, I suppose, for all authorities. Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to ask Martin, do we have any comments to make?
No, nothing further. It's just, again, considering the work programme process, if this is something we'd want to look at again, but as we are now, I think that's been a good discussion.
Okay, yeah, I think we can talk about that going forward. Irene and officers, thanks for your contributions, and certainly the amount of work that's done out there in terms of trying to communicate things in the community is outstanding. The number of events that there are going off that I see just in my neck of the woods, I sometimes, particularly you, Irene, and some of the other officers have got stunt doubles out there because there's so many events going off, and they're usually well visited within the community. And from what I've seen, even the one that we went to at the crossing a week or so ago, excellent, absolutely excellent. Thank you. So what I'm going to do now is we have the recommendations on page 54. I'm going to take a show of hands on those. Thank you. Okay, that's unanimous. Thank you very much. Agenda item number 6, the Council's Youth Service Provision in Nottinghamshire. And again, Councillor Taylor, you're a busy councillor today, Cabinet Member for Children and Families. I'm going to ask if you would like to introduce the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I believe this is a report that members have actually requested so that there's a deeper understanding of the youth service provision that we have in Nottinghamshire. And I have to say, I'm a big fan of our youth service, and we are, I think, probably an outlier nationally in the breadth, depth, just the general expanse of youth service provision that we have. We have a regular service. It's term time only, but it runs, throughout the year. It's delivered in different ways. We also have quite, I would say, an innovative and flexible workforce in addressing different challenges at different times. It's the youth service who has taken on the burden, responsibility for managing things like the HAF programme. It's the youth service, if I may say it, that is actually one of those partners who's not necessarily always recognised in some of the other papers and work we've discussed today, like the child exploitation, actually supporting vulnerable children, actually identifying challenges and issues early. I do hope that colleagues have read the papers, because I am so proud of our youth service and I'm so proud of this report. But what I'll probably do, Chair, if I may, is just pass over to see if Pom wants to comment at all before we go into any questions.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Taylor. Hello, Pom Bogle. I head the youth service. I think Councillor Taylor has introduced the paper beautifully, actually. What I can add to it is that what we've tried to do within the report is highlight how the service aligns with any statutory responsibilities, and it highlights how we've tried to drive positive outcomes for young people through our youth work approach. Within the report, I've highlighted key achievements, which include things like, as Councillor Taylor has described, sustaining a real strong youth service despite budgetary constraints. And we've used our real innovative kind of model around kind of providing universal and targeted youth work support, which provides interventions and supports and impacts on areas such as youth violence, online safety, and kind of supporting young people experiencing emotional well-being and mental health concerns. What we've tried to do is create a real safe and engaging space for young people, whether that's kind of within our young people centres or whether it's on our mobile provision or actually operating in local communities through our outreach work. And what I've done is I've also talked about our collaborative partnerships that maximise resources and which helps to expand our reach in many ways, including our specialised programmes like the HAF programme too, which really is focused on delivering outcomes for young people during the school holidays. So that's what we tried to do within the report.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Are there any other officers wish to make any comment? No. In that case, I'm going to move the recommendations on page 61. Oh, Councillor. Yeah, you can ask your question in a moment if that's okay. Thank you. So I just need a second. Councillor Callahan, thank you very much. And so I am now going to open to the floor for debate. And Councillor Callahan, you have to wait your turn, I'm afraid. Councillor Henry.
Thank you, Chair. I must say, before I ask my question, Chair, is that I am a great fan of the youth service. It's done some amazing work, especially in my area, with the limited budgets that they've got. And if I would encourage you all to take a closer look at the youth service. We were at an event. Tracy was there with me on Friday, and Kate Fowler was there as well. And you were blown away to see what has been achieved by the young people. And it's all thanks to Pom and your team for doing that. So I really appreciate that. It's really been fantastic, and Tracy as well for leading that. I would just point out that there's a little question that I want to ask on it's on our page 75 of the paper, paragraph 1. You talked around it would be beneficial for the council to develop an overarching strategy which embeds the existing vision, purpose, ambition approach and how you measure those going forward. So has there been, or are there plans to develop a council-wide strategy as suggested? If so, is there a timeline for completion? And is there any scope of application? If not, why? And I would just follow that up with another question, Chair, if you want me to do this now or after.
Can we take it in a moment, please? Thank you. So who's going to tackle that first
I'll
question?
start, and Pom may maybe come and fill in a little bit of the details. This is a real dilemma for us, Errol, because the page that you're referring to was part of that peer review. And there's a kind of, let's call it a naive tension between what we are required to do, because there is a statutory duty on us as a council to provide youth services, but it's not a statutory duty in the same way, or a statutory responsibility in the same way as, say, some of our social care or education responsibilities are. So we have that statutory duty, but as has already been alluded to, when budgets are tight, it's one of those services, as demonstrated elsewhere in the country, that is often trimmed, because it's how we're supposed to deliver it. So when I say there's a sort of naivety in that, to develop a long-term strategy for a service that is not an obligatory service in that way has been hard. So I would say we're in a better position than most, because we have championed our youth service, come what may, for a long time. You know, through subsequent administrations, we've ridden peaks and troughs, and we still have that rich and robust youth service. So in terms of our commitment to doing it, yes, we're absolutely committed to it. And Pom will probably pick up on what we're doing and how we're doing it in order to have that longer term strategy. But it is a real challenge, because there's that built-in conflict about a service that we value and want to deliver ongoing, and the fact that it is one of those services that is not statutory or obligatory in the way that other services are, which is why it's been trimmed or forfeited in other areas. So there's our ambition, and we're absolutely wedded to it. I've just got to persuade the 151 officer to keep paying for it. But Pom will give you more detail about how he's working up that ambition and that vision.
Thanks, Councillor Taylor. So there's a couple of moving parts with this, I think. And I think Councillor Taylor's absolutely right, how she's kind of described the landscape around youth services. And I think historically there's been an absence of a national policy driver which helps to frame local youth services and how they're delivered. But there's a number of things that are happening and have been happening. So despite having a policy statement or a strategy which describes our approach to working with young people in Nottinghamshire, something that I'm really proud of is that there is a real collaborative partnership across the systems, working with colleagues in the police, in the public sector, internally with our youth justice services, for instance, our family services, to really identify the support that young people need and being able to provide a bespoke programme of activity for them. So I'm incredibly proud of what we've been able to achieve despite this plan and this strategy. However, what I've referred to in the report is that DCMS, so government, have announced the production and implementation of a national youth strategy. But further details on what that looks like, we're still waiting on. But what it does allude to is potential funding and allocations and rolling out kind of national priorities, which we're then able to kind of align with local service plans. That's further details are expected to be rolled out over the coming months, really. What I think we're doing is we're keeping a close eye on what that kind of looks like, and we'll be able to consider all kind of opportunities with these new strategies once the specifics are clarified.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Rachel.
Thank you. I just also wanted to draw your attention to what we've said in the paper around youth hub networks. That's at paragraphs 21 and 22. Members might be more familiar at the moment with the term family hubs, and you'll know that a family hub is not just about what the children's centre service offers to children and families through our family hubs, but in fact what a network of services can provide. And in the same way, the youth service, albeit brilliant and a really good resource for children and young people, it's not the only service attempting to support teenagers. Schools, the police, the voluntary sector, etc., are all services. People like CAMS, mental health services and so forth. And our vision really is that we can have youth hubs sitting within our family hubs, specifically targeting wraparound services for children and young people, so your teenagers, and making sure that our youth hubs can be kind of hubs where we have a network of partners around them that better coordinated support services for teenagers, and that really is also forming part of our strategy going forwards, and is already beginning to happen. Lots of colleagues within POM's service and people that have been to our family hub launches will hopefully have seen youth services and youth workers involved in those events, and they're absolutely part of each of the Family Hub networks. And we're just looking to expand and really capitalise on what family hubs can mean if they've got a youth hub and a youth centre as part of the Family Hub network. So just important to mention that as well.
And just to make the point that the use of the language wraparound in that explanation different to the wraparound in the last debate. Yeah. So multi-agency.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. Errol.
Yeah, but just a point. I know what Rachel said earlier on is it's really good, but how is that sort of information disseminated? We don't really know about that really. You talk a lot about wraparound services and so on, all the things that you do with the youth service. All we see is the youth service doing their stuff, and what I need to see is more, because the impact we have at the moment is the antisocial behaviour in talking about my area and how that can be alleviated. So that's what I need. The other question I want to ask really, I know we talked about developing your data and quality assurance framework and all that. That will help to better understand what's going on. So at what stage is that framework development at present? And could you expand more on what data will be collected and how it will be used?
Who wants to go with that? You're going with that, Tom?
Yeah.
Thank you.
What we've done so far is we've tried to create as many feedback loops as possible. So that's our first thing. So it's expanding on the work that we do with our district youth forums, for instance, our members of youth parliament, and kind of using young people's expertise to help inform our direction of travel, and also to kind of help us assess the quality of our practice, and that's quite important for us as a service. What we've also been trying to do is develop a better understanding of the impact that we're having with our work with young people. So for instance, what we've just released in September this year was our youth service curriculum, youth work curriculum. And that helps to kind of define some of the key areas that we need to be working with young people on. So, for instance, whether that's achieving economic well-being, supporting young people through education, training, employment, for instance, kind of creating, a healthy environment for young people, thinking about their physical activity and their emotional well-being, for instance. There's loads and loads of things that are now a bit more explicit within our youth work curriculum that will support youth workers to be able to kind of really focus in their support to young people, to then try and think about how we measure some of the impacts. And the way that we've kind of done that is by developing a suite of quality assurance products. So kind of working with young people, for instance, around evaluating their journey and the impact of our work with them through things like case studies, for instance. Some of the specific things that we're hoping to kind of capture, so to answer your question around the impact, Councillor Henry, is things around the impact that we've had on young people's well-being more generally. So whether that is their emotional well-being, for instance, those young people that have traditionally experienced going missing from education, for instance, the impact of our work, has that improved their educational attainment and outcomes too. So it's things like that that we're really wanting to kind of develop a better awareness of, really.
Okay, thanks, Bob.
I was going to ask around, I know the bit you mentioned, Rachel, about the wraparound service. That bit, I was wanting to know how that is communicated out there, because I said all I see really is a youth service doing their bit. That's all.
Fair question, Rachel.
Yeah, I'm happy to come in, and Pom, if you wanted to add anything, that's fine.
Just take a comment from you, Rachel. Thank you.
Yeah, I would say, Councillor Henry, that our work on the concept of youth hub networks sitting within family hubs is sitting a little bit further behind our work on family hubs. So whilst we've seen those big launches that perhaps appear to be slightly more geared towards younger families, as the work on establishing a youth hub network in each of those areas happens, hopefully it will become more visible to the community in the way that the services are for the so that for the family hubs. I would say there's been a lot of, and as Mike mentioned, a lot of promotion around family hubs, and that's been quite visible in the community. And we're further behind as it relates to youth hub networks, but that is just starting now. So some of the youth hub areas or the family hub areas we're starting to target. Okay, let's think specifically about our youth hub, and hopefully that will start to be a bit more evident in the community for you.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Councillor Henry, for the questions and your positive comments at the beginning. Thank you very much. Councillor Lee.
Chairman, thank you. I was lucky enough on Friday as the Vice Chairman of the Council to be at the same event, but you beat me to it. It was really eye-opening. There was definitely young people there that had their lives saved by our intervention. I've got no doubt of that. Obviously, I can't go into the key details. However, there was one individual who actually really upset me because it could have been my daughter, it could have been my son, it could have been my neighbours, and without the main interaction from one of our youth workers picking up on the concerns and issues, I think that young person would have probably gone unnoticed, and sadly I don't think they would have been with us today, and I really mean that. However, it was a great event. It was great to see all our young people. We had one gentleman, young gentleman who was wearing the chain, who was very excited, and he needs to be back here as a councillor. He would be awesome, and he'd probably take the limelight from me, so that's great. And it was a great event. However, this morning, coming away from the Great War, this morning I received an email about devolution and what is probably going to be announced this week, or maybe not this week. And there was a key point that I just wanted to raise from the email, and I'm going to ask a question about it. And it was a very poignant words. It said, it's not just about spreadsheets and budgets, it's about understanding how real lives and communities will be impacted. And that's the question. Have we started planning for if unitary or the announcements this week will be announced by government to make sure our young people and our youth services that we cherish and other councils maybe don't, that we've got a plan of whatever will happen, that our young people, like the ones that we met.
Local government reorganisation in the way you just say unitary councils, and that's because we're quite busy kind of just delivering the service and doing the day job, and the announcements that we've heard have only come out in the last week or so. I think the more pertinent point I would make about it in general is councils and councillors and the officers delivering the service live with different challenges constantly. They are in a constant state of preparation for delivering next week, next month, next year. We've got, as an example, we've got local government elections in May for this council. Who knows who will be sitting in which seats come next May? Officers are used to that. So I would say that the service has a strong vision. It has a very strong and committed workforce who are used to delivering in all manner of challenging and changing circumstances. And I have every confidence that should there be some form of reorganisation, that our officer corps will actually rise to that challenge in the same way that they do with every other challenge in political cycles and other circumstances.
Okay, thank you. Okay, no problem. I'm going to go to Councillor Allen and then to you, Nigel, next. Councillor Allen, welcome to the committee.
Thank you.
And thank you for coming in to substitute today.
Well, it's very nice. I get a good view.
Don't be telling too many people. Ruin my street cred.
Okay. The main thing I want to say is not on script or anything that I've been told or asked to say. It's a personal view that I've spent many years, many summers. I delete the word summers because I gather they're not around in the summer, sitting in youth buses. And I love it. And I love the fact I can be in Warren Hill and there's a whole gang of youths who would have the label on them like troublemakers, who come in and just sit and chat and play with the computer and are inquiring about what I was doing there for a start. You know, you're not our age, you're not supposed to be here. And the same buses are seen on Killer Sick Fun days and all sorts of things like that, which I believe I've met Pom at, I'm sure. The thing is, it's an asset that should not be lost, is what I'm trying to say. And I gather you don't do them in the summers now. Oh, he can't answer. Oh, who's answering that one?
Oh, we can answer.
Yeah.
If that's the question, we can answer that. Pauline, do you want to just switch your microphone off?
Oh,
please. Thank you.
Yes.
And who's going to take that? Colin.
I got that was a very much at you start. I'll finish. Comment. Thank you, Councillor Taylor, and thank you for the offer. The offer of universal services that we offer our youth centres, youth spaces, is indeed that sits alongside the school academic year. But those youth clubs are used, during weekends, during summer holidays, during Easter holidays. Over the last few years, Pom, you'll have to remind me the level of the grants that we've received from the Holiday Activity Fund. It was our youth offer that did that. When we had the fire here, the following day when we were dealing with a couple of days, we were dealing with welfare of staff, some who'd been really quite significantly impacted upon it. It was the youth bus that was in the car park that we were using as our temporary office. When we had the threats of the riots following the Southport incident, we were ready to stand up our youth offer during that summer if something had happened in Nottinghamshire. Thankfully we didn't need that. But Pom and I were talking late into the night about what would we do if we were having examples of things that we were seeing in other parts of the country, and that would have involved our mobiles. So it's that flexible and foot that I've got to say leaves me with huge pride of what we achieve here. We've got that core, and it feels cores are usually small, aren't they? We've got a core of 38 weeks of a year, that we can then move into those following 14 weeks, and increasingly do, if given the opportunity through grant, etc., as in the Holiday Activity Fund. We have a bit of a tumbleweed moment at the moment, I think, with regards to whether the Holiday Activity Fund is continuing. And we've asked our representatives in central government to explore that, because the sooner we know a decision one way or the other, the sooner we can get on with planning or on planning. But the last event, as it stands, is it?
It's in Christmas time, so the last holiday period of delivery for HAF will be this Christmas. And as Colin's described, we're still just waiting on further details as to whether it's going to be continue to be rolled out or not.
Councillor Allen, of course you can.
We're used to that, really. Forgotten. I forgot what I was going to say now. It's important to me, I thought it was, and I think it's important to the community to fulfil a gap that is required. It is just something that you think kids may not be bothered with, but sometimes they sit at home with just the telly and their Xboxes and whatever, and the fact there's something going on down the road where they can meet their mates and go and do that is fine. And I applaud the fact that it's linked with children's centres, the two things that are very close to my heart, and many children's centres that benefit from the thing that you do, which are many things, of course. Sorry, forgotten how to speak. But there you are. Thank you.
Councillor Allen, that was lovely, positive, and you're more than welcome to come to this committee again. I'm going to move to Nigel.
Thank you very much. Two observations and then two questions, if I may. My first observation is this is the most encouraging meeting of this committee I've had the privilege of attending yet. I'm finding this deeply encouraging, and I mean that. Secondly, there's research which I was particularly struck by. I was introduced to it earlier this year that analysed the thousands of questions that teenagers tend to ask and boiled them down to ask, are there core questions that come through all of the thousands? And they come down to these three. One is, who am I? And the second is, where do I fit? Or where do I belong? And the third is, what's my purpose? And so to hear of anything which is speaking into those deep longings and questions that teenagers typically carry is really encouraging. My two questions are these. First of all, is there mapping between the services you're describing, brilliant services today, and where churches are running youth groups, where schools themselves have youth workers or chaplains that are speaking into these situations as well? And also, I'm aware that Nottinghamshire University has its own outreach program tailored specifically to pupil premium students and additional targeted support for them. My guess is Nottingham University probably does as well, but certainly there's an outreach service as part of Nottingham Trent, and I wondered if they're mapped into this as well. That was my first question. I'll pause with that one.
Okay, Paul. Thank you, Nigel, for that question. So in terms of mapping, of course, there's always more work that we could do to kind of really understand the breadth of activity across the area, across Nottinghamshire, and even kind of splitting it down into our 7 districts too. I think there is a tremendous amount of work that already happens. So, for instance, as part of the council's youth service, we don't own it, but what we do is facilitate what we call the Play and Youth Voluntary Sector Partnership, and it has a range of providers of play and youth activity across the county that come together to do a number of things. Really, it's about it's an opportunity to network. But more importantly, it's about discussions around understanding the needs of young people. And through those discussions, we're then able to kind of identify gaps in provision and then also identify ways in which some of those gaps are going to be bridged too. And it's a partnership that the membership of that partnership do include the voluntary and community sector, uniformed groups, church groups, and then of course there's representation from the council's youth service too. But there's always opportunities to kind of extend the membership.
Thank you. That's really encouraging. And I wonder, have churches been sent explicit invitations to join those forums? And if not, could they be?
Of course, yes. Yeah, of course we'll get some comms out and an invite to church groups.
Brilliant. Yeah. Thank you so much. My second question is there an emphasis within the provision on training young people to become leaders, both today and in the future? Just as I enjoyed listening to Councillor Taylor talking about youth work being her passion, mine is developing young leadership. And it's not just about young leaders tomorrow. I believe we need them today. If we can be training them to be peer leaders and to be future leaders, then it seems to me we're really amplifying the impact of what we're doing. Is that built into the strategy?
Okay.
I want a good news chance. Absolutely, yes. So, and in so many ways. So, over recent weeks, Colin and I have done what we've called some road trips to some of our young people's centres. And a number of the people that we've met there have been young people who found their way to a youth centre to start with, whether it was purely recreational, whether it was when they were at a point of need, but who are volunteers, who have started to take on responsibility for their colleagues in the youth centres. Councillor Henry and Lee will have heard these stories when we did the presentations on Friday evening, that they were young people who'd had challenging life experiences, had been welcomed, had been nurtured, if you like, were starting to share their care with the people around them, And so that's just in the sort of nurturing way. I've met over the years that I've been privileged to do this job and have the association with the youth service. I've met young people who've gone through our youth centres who have gone on to youth work apprenticeships or have been studying. I've been to events where our staff are introducing me to their young adult children who are now following, whether that's in social work, whether that's in youth work. It's a repeated story, it's not a one-off. So in terms of the service's ability to nurture qualities and leadership qualities in our young people, I would say, absolutely knocking it out of the park.
Okay.
One brief response to that, then, if I may. Excellent is first, brilliant. And secondly, I'm sure James would echo this as well, but if there's ever anything that either of us can do to facilitate some of those joining up of dots and making of connections, and in some of our schools we do offer leadership programs to develop young leadership. So again, there could be opportunity for us to join forces, if you will. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you, and thanks for your offer and support. Lastly, Councillor Callahan, do you have a comment?
Yes, I do have a comment. It's not a question, and I do agree with everything that you said earlier on, Tracy, which is a surprise. But what I would like to say is, the Labour Party or the Labour group are really proud of our youth service. But I'd like to go on and say that I'm really proud of you, Pom, because your passion and commitment shines through. And that would be a motivational factor to anybody that you come across. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Callahan. Councillor Taylor.
I'd actually like to come back on an earlier question of Councillor Allen's, and that was about when we deliver and the frequency or how we do it. I've been involved with the service for 7 years since I was first elected in 2017, and it is covered in the report. The service was actually drastically reduced under a previous administration when it went down from 45 to 38 weeks a year. So it's important to make it clear it's never been a 52-week service, but it was cut from 45 to 38 weeks in 2014. And when I first came into post in 2017, there were plans afoot to cut that further, and we would have been losing our mobile buses, the ones that you've spoken so passionately about today. They were set to be axed, and that was one of the first things that I was involved in with POM and with the service, and we managed to find a way to not only reverse those cuts, but I think we've had some new youth buses out of them since as well, POM, haven't we? So we still have that active fleet. It's important to say that I understand the comments about young people looking for something to do, but it's also true that from the data that POM does keep all of the time, that there is a drop-off in the holidays, so people don't necessarily want the service then. A little bit like, ironically, the HAF programme runs during the holidays, but people don't always want to attend because adults in the families are keeping children at home with them, or perhaps if they can, they're going on holiday. So I think we've done really well given cuts that we've seen in the past, the reversals that we've made to some of the service cuts, and the really clear commitment that we as a council have made to what is an exceptional service. And then the other thing I'd like to just, I suppose, round off with, Chairman, if I may, we often think of the youth service, and colleagues will have heard me say this several times, we think of it as being something a little bit soft and fluffy, just playing table tennis on a Friday night and having a drink of pop or something. But the youth service is absolutely embedded in so many of the other services that this council delivers. We talked in the earlier papers about children at risk of exploitation. This is the golden thread or the oil in the engine that runs through keeping children out of care, edge of care, keeping them out of trouble, identifying children who are vulnerable, stopping foster care replacement breakdowns by actually supporting them, because youth services stretches into our outdoor ed service as well, and we've got our residential units. We have the celebration events that we experienced last Friday, and we've got another one coming up in a couple of weeks' time for the Shadow and for D&V. Now, Shadow is an event that this council has been running for 50 years. Again, we are, exceptional nationally in the things that we do with our young people, the opportunities that we provide for them, and actually how that supports delivery of council services in so many other ways. So for me, although we had spoke a little while ago and said it's not a statutory service, if I could have anything nailed down forever, it would be youth service as a core provision in council services. Sorry, Chairman.
Thank you. Nigel, is it important?
Potentially, and I'll be brief. I noted the hints there. I was thinking about your comments there, Councillor Taylor, about the drop-off in demand during school holidays, which is one way of measuring need, I think. The other is that arguably for those youngsters who are availing of the service during school holidays, it may be that they need it more than they do during term time. As a head teacher, for example, I was familiar with the phenomenon that on a Friday afternoon, the rise in safeguarding concerns was because youngsters were panicking about having to do the weekend without the support of their school. And even more intense at the end of a term, when suddenly they were thinking, I've got all these weeks without my school support network, and I'm panicking. And that's where I think the youth service could have a particular role potentially to play. That's not a question, it's more of an observation, really.
And I would say that it does. It may not be universal provision throughout the year. Again, I can think of live examples. A few years ago when we were doing some prep work, POM, for the Shadow event, and we did the summer prep at Pearlthorpe, and talking to some of the youth workers that were there on that particular day, where the young people were being taught, about their orienteering, whatever was required of them. And I remember two specific cases where the youth workers were talking about it being on the cusp of the school holidays and having identified needs in child X and child Y, totally unrelated. So the provision was being put in place to make sure that those adults around the child remained around the child. So whilst we talk about this being a term time only service and in its universal offering, it is not constrained to those 38 weeks. It happens in different ways in different places in response to need. And again, I think that's something that isn't necessarily very visible, so it's good that you've raised the question, but it is there. It is simply not universally there.
Thank you, and thank you, Nigel. Martin, do we have anything we need to?
No further action, but I think after the discussion, I think we'll get it formalised in the minutes how appreciative members are of the service and what a great service that they think it is. So we've got that down for posterity.
Absolutely, I think we are very, very lucky not just to have the fantastic youth service and the people that work in it, but I think we're also lucky, certainly in this committee, where all members are just interested in positively improving or enhancing the lives of children and families in our county. There's no nonsense, there's no politicking. We work together, and that's really appreciated. The work that you guys do as officers is too. So if we can move to the vote, please, of the recommendation on 61. All those in favour? Thank you. That's unanimous. And I am conscious of the time, but we will move on to agenda item 7, which is partnership progress in improving the experiences and outcomes for children and young people with SEND. And I will ask Colin Pettigrew, Corporate Director, Children and Families, to introduce the report, if I may, please.
Thank you, Chair. And this is a partnership report, and I'm actually going to ask Rosa to introduce the report unusually.
Rosa, lovely to have you here.
Thank you very much. And it's one of the real pleasures to come here actually in that partnership with Colin and present this work that we do collectively. And one of the real differences over the last 2 years has been that integration and the move towards being a real partnership in how we deliver the work we're doing. So I'm going to take the paper as read. I'm going to note that you'll see we've got the 2 priority action areas that we have worked, and last time we reported here, unfortunately I couldn't be present, but you will have heard a detailed oversight of how we're improving and how actually despite that we're still on a journey, and a journey for improvement for both of us as partners. We have had some really positive oversight and assurances, both in the paper and very recently last week as part of a intermediate review by DFE and Ofsted colleagues. And we are really grateful for the support that yourselves and partners across the system have given us, and that includes our education partners out in schools, out in academy trusts and multi-academy trusts, in developing some really strong partnerships, but also really excitingly a really strong data set, so that as we talked about with some of the other work with children, we can not only see where we're delivering change, but we can understand the impact on that positively for children and young people in their lives. We know that waiting times are not where we would want them to be for many health services, but also we've seen a significant, sometimes more than 100% growth in referrals into our services, especially for neurodivergence and neurodiversity and assessments for those things. So we are managing those pressures and all those that we see in the SEND services are national pressures. They're not unique to Nottinghamshire. What is unique to us, I believe, is the strength of our partnership working, our emerging data set, which will really help us to be very different in the future, and the great support and partnership we've had in developing our SEND outcomes, our strategy, our ambition beyond what you've seen in this paper, which is about improvement in a reactive way. We are now really focusing on a joint future, how we work together and how we improve the lives of children and young people in Nottinghamshire. So, Colin, I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
I don't know, give me time.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Smith, is there anything you'd like to contribute?
Thank you, Jim. Just to echo what Rosa has said in introducing the report, and I think if you read it, I won't go through it, but if you read it, you can clearly see that whilst we're on a long journey of improvement, we've taken huge steps forward as a partnership working together to improve the experiences of children and families across Nottinghamshire, and that's something we can be proud of and we'll continue to work towards as a partnership through the SEND Improvement Board, but all the other bodies that will come off that who are having a daily impact on children and families across the county. Happy to answer any questions on the report as is in front of you.
Okay, so any other comment from officers? No. So may I move the recommendations on page 105, 106 and ask for a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Callaghan. I am now going to open up for questions, contributions from the floor. Councillor Callaghan.
Thank you. Just a quick one. On page 100, paragraph 10b, says this work will include a full service review of statutory SEND services seeking to embed a more strength-based rationale relation approach, with a greater focus on providing the right support at the right time for children. Just a quick question. What is the timeline for this full service review, and when is it likely to be completed?
Peter.
Hi there, and thank you for the question. So the review is underway currently. It stems from some work that took place early on in the improvement journey around mapping processes and systems, which led us to the need really to extend what was in the priority action plan and do a more thorough piece of work. So we're currently we've got a couple of SEND consultants working alongside the service, and we're trying to learn from the work that we've done in the safeguarding world and the MASH world, in terms of working with colleagues, hearing from schools, hearing from parents and carers, and doing a really thorough shift and changing the way that we work to be more locality based, more about relationship, building up strong relationships and working together for the best outcomes for our children and young people. So that's underway at the moment, and there's fortnightly updates going out through the workforce what I'm anticipating is that by the end of this financial year, we'll have some revisions to that model that we can then begin to implement in the new financial year. So, April 2025.
Thanks, Peter. Get that right? Right. I've got one question. Paragraphs 8 and 9, and particularly paragraph 9 with figure 1. So we're showing the new EHC plans which are issued. We talk in paragraph 8 about the number of requests, which actually gives that some context. Could we add into figure 1 a second y-axis that demonstrate the number of requests so that it's shown diagrammatically, pictorially, rather than just in the narrative? I think that would be helpful, and I think it just offers a better insight than just looking at that graph, which potentially some people might look at that and just say, yeah, well, there's a downward trend over the last few months, when actually we know there's a considerable upward trend as well in terms of the number of requests.
Richard, we're narrowing the gap because other local areas' times are coming down, and this isn't a good thing. Yeah, he says this as if it's a good thing. It's not. Yeah, but our performance is getting closer to national average, despite the challenges.
I'm more than happy to have a discussion outside this room just to discuss what needs to go on there. I think that there's a lot of good work going on in the background that's not represented in those graphs, and the context of the difficulties that we face as well aren't necessarily represented in there. So, we see the good work that's done, we hear the good work that's done. I think it's just a minor thing that just needs adjustment, please. Okay? Any other questions? Comments? No? Then I am going to ask Martin. We don't have anything to add other than my...
Yeah, just what you just said. So, just about the having a different formulation for the graph in future reports.
Okay, so I'm going to go to the vote with the recommendation shown on 105, 106. Can I have a show of hands, please? Thank you. That's unanimous. And we are now finally going to quickly go onto the work programme, where the comments for noting, recommendations for noting on 108. Ask Martin, is there anything you'd like to add with regard to work programme?
Just as always, if you've got any suggestions about areas, let us know. And then secondly, the second meeting of the fostering review is next week. So we look forward to seeing people that are involved with that then.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Smith, did you want to add something?
You finish your work programme, I'd like to speak at the end if I may.
Okay, no problem. Anyone? Thank you. That's just for noting. So that's all the agenda items complete. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to say a massive thank you to committee. This is my last committee sat in this chair as the Cabinet Member for Education and SEND, and I'd like to thank you all for your really important work and your chairmanship, Councillor and Trainer, but also officers as well. If you look back, I was making some notes during the early items as I had time on my hands, as it was all Councillor Taylor, and I made some notes about work you've actually had an impact on in my department. If you look at SEND improvement, that we only discussed for about 10 minutes. I think that's testament to the journey we've been on as a committee, but as a council and a partnership, and you've played an active part in that. But also school place sufficiency. You've done a lot of work on secondary place planning and primary place planning, which has helped us get on with it. And we're investing over £50 million into expanding schools now, which you've played a part in. So a massive thank you to everybody who's contributed to that. Some questions have been more difficult than others, and I'm sure they'll get even more difficult in the months ahead in a different job. But thank you for that. Thank you to officers for their fantastic support and all you've done over the years, and thank you to Martin and you, Councillor and Trainer, for everything you've done to help education and SEND improvement. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. They're really kind words, and good luck. Okay, I declare this meeting closed. Thank you all for your attendance.